The gymnasium had been decorated for weeks. Gold streamers hung from the basketball hoops. A banner read "Congratulations," Soapy in letters that her father, Raymond Holt, had ordered custom-made from a print shop in downtown Halifax. The folding tables were draped in white linen. A chocolate fountain sat at the center, still running, its dark ribbon of sweetness falling into an empty catch basin. The DJ had been playing for 40 minutes. Nobody had come. Raymond stood near the door in a suit that cost more than most of his employees made in a month. He kept checking his phone. He kept smiling the kind of smile that a man wears when he is absolutely certain everything is fine. Because the alternative, accepting that it is not, is simply too painful to consider. Beside him, Sophie sat in her chair, the one with the custom cushion her physiotherapist had fitted for her spine. She was 12 years old. Her hair had been curled that morning by a woman Raymond had hired to come to the house. There were small pearl clips holding the curls in place. She wore a lavender dress. Her hands, folded in her lap, were very still. She had been born with spinal muscular atrophy. She had never walked. She had never been embarrassed about that, not until this year, not until her classmates had started choosing which birthday parties to attend and which to avoid, not until she understood, truly understood, that their parents were the ones doing the choosing. "The music is nice," Sophie said. Raymond looked at her. "It is. Your playlist, I know." She paused. "Dad, you can stop checking your phone." He put it in his pocket. The DJ, a young man named Terence who had been hired for 3 hours, caught Raymond's eye across the room and gave a small, helpless shrug. Raymond shook his head slightly. "Keep playing." So the music played. The chocolate fountain ran. The gold streamers caught the gymnasium light and shimmered. And nobody came. Raymond Holt had built Holt Atlantic from nothing. That was the story he told, and it was mostly true, which is the best that can be said for most stories people tell about themselves. He had grown up in Dartmouth in a house where the windows didn't seal properly, and his mother worked 2 jobs, and his father was mostly absent in the way that some fathers are, physically present, emotionally elsewhere. He had clawed his way through Dalhousie on scholarships and sheer stubbornness, started a small commercial refrigeration company at 27, and by the time he was 45, Holt Atlantic supplied cold storage infrastructure to food distributors across the maritime provinces and into Quebec. He had a house in the south end of Halifax, with a kitchen that had been featured in a magazine. He had a driver. He had a nutritionist who sent him weekly meal plans by email. He had everything that a man is supposed to want once he has successfully escaped being poor, and he had spent the past 6 years trying to make sure his daughter had everything too. Sophie's mother, Renata, had left when Sophie was 4, not because of the diagnosis. Raymond was careful to tell people that, always. Renata had simply discovered, slowly and then all at once, that the life she had married into was not the life she wanted, and she had moved to Vancouver and remarried and sent Sophie birthday cards that arrived 3 days late and Christmas gifts that were always slightly wrong, like they had been chosen by someone who knew Sophie from a description rather than in person, which Raymond supposed was true. He did not hate Renata. He had decided not to. Hating her would have required ongoing energy, and Raymond Holt was a man who did not spend energy on things that did not move him forward. He had Sophie. He had his work. He had a very capable nanny named Beverly, who had been with them for 5 years and who Sophie adored. What he did not have, what he had never quite managed to find, was a way into the social world of Sophie's school. Birchwood Academy was a private school in the North End, the kind of place that had a Latin motto and a waiting list and a parents' association that organized fundraising galas with silent auctions and a general sense that everyone already knew each other from somewhere. Raymond had bought his way into Birchwood in the way that men like him buy their way into things, with a donation to the new science wing, with prompt payment of fees, with a pleasant smile at orientation night. But buying in is not the same as belonging. The other parents were lawyers and architects and surgeons, who had all, it seemed, gone to school together or summered in the same places, or knew each other through networks that Raymond had never been part of. They were polite to him. They were warm, even in the careful way that people are warm to someone they have decided is not quite their kind. And so their children, who had learned to read their parents' warmth and its calibrations the way all children do, had done the same thing to Sophie. They were not cruel to her. Raymond had to keep telling himself that they were not cruel. They simply didn't think of her. They didn't include her in the group chats. They didn't save her a seat. They didn't invite her to things that Sophie only heard about afterward on Monday mornings, when she would come home from school with a look on her face that she was trying very hard to make neutral. She had never cried about it in front of him. That was the thing that got Raymond, that she protected him from it. At 12 years old, he had wanted to give her one day that was different, one Saturday in April that she would remember as the day when everything changed, when her classmates showed up and saw her for who she was, and they all danced and ate chocolate-covered strawberries, and Terence the DJ played the songs from her carefully assembled playlist. He had sent invitations to 22 children. He had called 4 of their parents personally. He had rented the gymnasium at the community center. He had hired the chocolate fountain. Nobody had come. The door opened at 4:17. It did not open the way Raymond had been imagining it would open, not with a rush of classmates in nice clothes, laughing, calling, "So fame." It opened slowly, the way a door opens when the person behind it is not entirely certain they have the right place. A girl stood in the doorway. She was small, maybe 10 or 11, with a dark braid that had come partly undone. She was wearing a hoodie that was too big for her, and jeans that were clean but frayed at the hem, and sneakers that had been white once and were now the particular gray that comes from many kilometers of walking. She was carrying a paper bag from a grocery store. The top was folded over neatly. She looked at the gymnasium, the streamers, the fountain, the tables, the banner, the DJ still playing softly in the corner, and then she looked at Sophie, and something in her face shifted. Not pity. Raymond could not have explained exactly what it was, but he knew it more like recognition. "Is this Sophie's party?" the girl asked. Sophie looked at her father. Raymond looked at the girl. "Yes," Sophie said. "Good," the girl said. "I wasn't sure I had the right address. My Nana helped me look it up." She came into the gymnasium, letting the door close behind her. She walked to Sophie the way you walk toward someone you have already decided to be friends with, her paper bag rustling at her side. "I'm Maura. I live on Gottingen Street. I don't go to your school, but I saw your flyer at the library." Sophie blinked. "There was no flyer at the library." "No," Maura agreed. "But I was at the library and I heard your dad talking on the phone about the party and I thought it sounded nice." She set the paper bag on the table beside the chocolate fountain. "I brought something. It's not much. It's a plant. My Nana said you can't go to a party without bringing something." Raymond, who had not moved in several seconds, found his voice. "That's very kind." Maura glanced up at him. She had serious brown eyes and a thin face. "You look sad," she told him. "You shouldn't look sad. It's a party." Raymond Holt, who had not cried in 3 years, felt something shift dangerously behind his eyes. "You're right," he said. "You're absolutely right." Sophie reached into the paper bag and pulled out a small succulent in a terracotta pot. Its pot painted over in messy, cheerful blue stripes. It was clearly hand-painted. "Did you paint this?" "My Nana did. She paints pots for the market in the summer. She said a plant that keeps on living is a good gift." Maura pulled out the chair next to Sophie and sat down in it with the ease of someone who has never stood on ceremony. "So, is there food?" "I haven't had lunch." Her name was Maura Tran. She was 11, the child of a single mother named Lynn, who worked the overnight shift at the logistics warehouse on the edge of the city. She lived with her maternal grandmother, a small, precise woman named Clara, who had immigrated from Vietnam in the 1980s and who spoke 4 languages and kept an immaculate apartment on Gottingen Street, and who grew tomatoes in pots on the balcony every summer and sold painted terracotta pots at the Seaport Farmers Market. None of this Raymond learned that afternoon. He learned it piece by piece over the weeks that followed, the way you learn things about someone who has simply decided, with the clean authority of childhood, to become a part of your life. That first afternoon, what he learned was this. Maura ate 3 plates of food and drank 2 glasses of juice and taught Sophie a card game her grandmother had taught her and requested 2 songs from Terence the DJ by walking up to him with great seriousness and asking if he knew them, and when he did, she pulled Sophie's chair to the middle of the gymnasium floor and danced beside it in the particular way of someone who is not self-conscious about dancing because it has never occurred to her that dancing is something to be self-conscious about. Sophie laughed. It was the laugh she made when something caught her by surprise, high and short and unguarded, The laugh she made at home when she was watching something funny with Beverly, not the careful, social laugh she used at school. Raymond had not heard it in months. He sat at one of the linen-draped tables and watched his daughter laugh, and he felt ashamed of himself for how much it undid him. He was a man who had built a company. He was a man who had negotiated contracts worth hundreds of thousands of dollars across a conference table without his expression changing. And he was sitting in a rented gymnasium with streamers and a chocolate fountain that was now running mostly for two 12-year-old girls, and a child who had come in off the street with a painted pot was making his daughter laugh. And Raymond Holt could not hold himself together. He went to the bathroom for a few minutes. When he came back, Maura was showing Sophie something on a piece of paper she had found in her jacket pocket. A map, it turned out, of the neighborhood she'd walked to get here, the route she'd marked out in pen. 5 kilometers, Maura said matter-of-factly. My Nana wanted to come with me, but she had a market booking she couldn't move. So she walked me halfway, and then I came the rest. Sophie looked at the map. You walked 5 kilometers to come to my party. Maura looked at her as if this were a strange question. You don't walk 5 kilometers for something unless it matters, she said. So I walked 5 kilometers. Sophie was quiet for a moment. Nobody else came, she said. It was the first time she had said it aloud. Maura shrugged. I came, she said. And the chocolate fountain is very good. The following Tuesday, Raymond's phone rang at 9 in the morning. It was David Wills, the chairman of the board of Holt Atlantic. The call was not entirely unexpected. Raymond had been aware for several months that there was a restlessness in the board, a particular kind of discomfort that men in good suits develop when the numbers they are looking at don't behave the way they want numbers to behave. Holt Atlantic's revenue had plateaued. The maritime market was saturated. Several board members had been making careful suggestions at dinners, at the ends of calls, in the particular indirect way of men who have decided something and want to see if you will reach the same conclusion without being told, about the possibility of expanding into the oil and gas sector. There was, they said, significant opportunity in cold storage infrastructure for the extraction industry in northern Alberta. Raymond had not said no. He had not said yes. He had said he was reviewing the projections, which was true, and he had been reviewing them with the slow, thorough discomfort of a man who is not sure he likes what he is finding. Ray, David said. I'm going to be direct. I'd appreciate that, Raymond said. The board wants a decision by end of quarter. The Alberta opportunity doesn't wait. There are other companies looking at it, and if we're not in the room, we're not in the room. Raymond was at his desk. Through the window he could see the harbor, gray and flat under an April sky. The projections are good, he said carefully. The margins are excellent. They are, David agreed. But we'd be supplying infrastructure to operations that are... He stopped. That are profitable, David said. Legally operating, fully permitted, that are, by any reasonable measure, the largest single contributor to the expansion of the oil sands, Raymond said. Which are? A political conversation, David said, and his voice had taken on the particular smooth patience of a man who has had this conversation before and who believes the other person will eventually come around. Ray, we're a cold storage company. We are not in the business of making political statements. Raymond thought about Sophie. He thought about the chocolate fountain and the empty gymnasium and Maura Tran walking 5 kilometers in worn-out sneakers because she had decided it mattered. I'll have an answer by end of quarter, he said. He hung up and sat looking at the harbor for a long time. He went to find Clara Tran on a Saturday. It took him 3 phone calls to track down which market stall was hers. Sophie had passed along what Maura had told her, and Raymond had done the rest. Clara Tran's stall at the Seaport Farmers Market was easy to find once you were looking for it. A folding table covered in a patterned cloth, with rows of hand-painted terracotta pots in every size, and a hand-lettered sign that read Tran's Garden Pots, made with care. Clara herself was a small woman in her 70s with silver-streaked hair and reading glasses on a chain around her neck, and the particular posture of someone who has spent a lifetime standing. She was arranging pots on the table with precise care when Raymond introduced himself. She looked at him steadily. You're Sophie's father. I am. Maura talks about Sophie. Clara's English was careful and deliberate, each word placed with intention. She says Sophie is very funny and very smart. She is, Raymond said. Both of those things. Clara looked at him for a moment longer. You didn't come here to buy a pot. Raymond almost smiled. No, I came to thank you. For raising a girl who walked 5 kilometers to a stranger's party. Clara was quiet. She adjusted the position of a small blue pot on the table. Maura does not see strangers the way other people do, she said finally. She sees people who she has not yet met. That is different. She paused. When I was young, in a new country, I had nothing. Someone offered me dinner once. Just dinner. They did not know me. They were not rich people. They had barely enough, but they offered. She smoothed the cloth on the table. That dinner, I have never forgotten it. Not one day in 40 years. She looked up at Raymond. Maura knows this story. Maybe that is why she walks. Raymond sat with that for a long moment. Can I ask you something, he said. You can ask. Does Maura? Does she know what she does? The effect she has? Clara thought about this seriously. She knows that showing up matters, she said. She does not always know how much, but she knows it matters. She held a pot out to him, small, painted with yellow stripes. Here, for Sophie, same price as everyone else. Raymond paid full price. He bought 4 pots. He carried them to his car and sat in the driver's seat for a while before starting the engine. Sophie and Maura began spending time together on weekend afternoons. This happened without formal arrangement. Maura would appear at the community center, where Sophie did her adapted swimming program on Saturdays, and they would sit together afterward, eating the granola bars, Beverly packed, and they would talk with the easy, rapid fluency of children who have identified each other as people worth talking to. Raymond drove Maura home afterward those first few times. Then, once Clara had met him and assessed him and made the internal calculation that Clara Tran made about people, precise, unhurried, and generally accurate, she allowed the arrangement to continue. Raymond had driven through that part of Gottingen Street before, but not slowly, not looking. He looked now. He saw the corner store where kids waited after school. He saw the community garden with its chain-link fence and its hand-painted beds. He saw the apartment buildings with the satellite dishes on the balconies and the shoes drying on windowsills and the small signs of lives being lived carefully within budgets that did not leave room for error. He thought about Holt Atlantic. He thought about Alberta. He thought about a terracotta pot painted blue by a woman in her 70s who had come to this country with nothing and who had managed, across decades, to transmit to her granddaughter the specific knowledge that showing up for people is the only currency that does not devalue. The board meeting was on a Thursday. Raymond had reviewed the projections 3 more times. He had had a long conversation with his operations director, a careful woman named Sandra, who had been with the company for 11 years, and who had said, when pressed for her honest view, that the Alberta numbers were good, and the environmental concerns were real, and those 2 things were both true at the same time, and she didn't think she could tell him which one mattered more. Raymond had sat with that. He walked into the boardroom at 9 o'clock. David Wills was there, and the 6 other board members, and the slide deck was already up on the screen with the quarterly projections and the Alberta market analysis and the projected margin increase, 31% over 3 years. Raymond sat down. He looked at the table. He looked at the faces of the men and women who had trusted him with their investments and who were looking at him now with the careful, watchful expression of people who believe they know what he is going to say and who are waiting for the confirmation. I've reviewed the Alberta proposal, Raymond said. The numbers are accurate. The margins are real. I'm not going to question the financial analysis. He paused. I'm also not going to recommend that we proceed with it. The room was quiet in the particular way of rooms where people are deciding how to respond. Ray, David began, hear me out. Raymond kept his voice even. Holt Atlantic's reputation is built on being a company that food distributors trust. Schools, hospitals, community food banks. We have 31 contracts with organizations that chose us specifically because of who we are and what we supply, and the values we signal by the clients we take on. He looked around the table. If we take on oil sands infrastructure work, we don't lose those contracts immediately. Maybe we don't lose them at all. But we change what we are. And I have spent 20 years building what we are. You've also spent 20 years building shareholder value, said a board member named Gerald, not unkindly. I have, Raymond agreed, and I intend to keep doing that. I have an alternative proposal. He opened the folder in front of him. There is a significant and currently underserved market in cold storage infrastructure for small and mid-sized food producers in rural Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, and PEI. Farms, fisheries, local food systems, infrastructure that is currently inadequate and that is costing those producers and the communities that depend on them significantly. He slid copies of the document across the table. The margins are lower than Alberta, 15% over 3 years instead of 31. But the growth trajectory is longer, the market is less volatile, and the community relationships we build will be of a kind that last. Silence. David picked up the document and began reading. The others followed. Raymond sat with his hands flat on the table and waited. It was Gerald who spoke first. You've modeled this out, completely. The 15% is conservative, Raymond said. Sandra's team ran 3 scenarios. 15 is the floor. David set the document down. He looked at Raymond with an expression that Raymond could not entirely read, not anger, not approval, something more complex. This matters to you, David said, more than the numbers. The numbers matter, Raymond said. They always matter, but so does this. He paused. I want to build a company that I can describe to my daughter without needing to leave parts out. The room held that for a moment. It was not a unanimous vote. Gerald and 2 others abstained, which in the language of boards means they were not willing to oppose, but were also not willing to commit. But 4 board members voted in favor, and David Wills, after a long silence that Raymond could not breathe through, voted in favor as well. The Alberta proposal was set aside. The rural maritime expansion moved forward. On a Friday evening in May, Raymond picked Sophie up from school and drove not home but to Gottingen Street. He had told Sophie only that they were visiting someone. Sophie, who had learned over the past few weeks that visits to Gottingen Street usually ended in good ways, did not ask too many questions. Clara Tran opened the apartment door before they knocked. She had heard the elevator. She was wearing an apron, and the apartment smelled of something with lemongrass and ginger that Raymond recognized from the dinners Maura had described. Maura appeared in the hallway behind her grandmother. She had paint on her left hand. She looked at Sophie, and then at Raymond, and then back at Sophie. Nana made enough for 6 people, she said. She always does. Always, Clara confirmed without apology. They ate at the small kitchen table, 4 of them, close together in the way that small apartments make necessary. Clara's dishes were mismatched but clean. The food was extraordinary. Raymond had 3 helpings and said so, and Clara received this information with a small nod that was the closest she came to showing that it pleased her. Afterward, Maura showed Sophie the balcony, narrow, with 2 plastic chairs and 7 terracotta pots of tomato seedlings in various stages of progress. The late evening light was coming in low and golden over the rooftops. Raymond stood in the kitchen doorway watching the 2 girls on the balcony. Sophie had her phone out and was taking pictures of the seedlings. Maura was narrating the growth progress of each plant with great seriousness. Sophie kept laughing. She had a dish towel in her hands. She is different, Clara said quietly. Sophie, since they started spending time together. She is, Raymond said. So am I. Clara did not ask what he meant. She seemed to know. Outside on the balcony, Sophie held up her phone to show Maura a photo she'd taken, and Maura leaned in to look at it, and the light came through the tomato plants and made everything gold, and Raymond stood in a small kitchen on Gottingen Street and thought, this is the thing that does not devalue. He told Sophie about the board meeting that night, on the drive home. He did not tell her all of it. She was 12, and some of it was not for 12-year-olds, but he told her the shape of it, that there had been a choice, that one path had more money and one path had more of something else, and that he had chosen the something else. Sophie was quiet for a moment, watching the city go by outside the window. Was it scary? She asked. Yes, he said. It was good, she said, in the particular tone of someone who has thought about this before. Things that matter should be a little scary. Otherwise, how do you know they matter? Raymond glanced at her. Where did you thought about it? I think Maura said something like it. About walking 5 kilometers, she paused. She said she was nervous the whole way, about whether she had the right address, about whether it would be weird to just show up. She turned to look at her father, but she came anyway, Raymond nodded. She came anyway, he said. He drove the rest of the way home, in silence that was not empty but full. The kind of full that comes from something being repaired, slowly, the way things that are repaired properly are always repaired. Carefully, with the right materials, not quickly, and in a way that holds. The succulent in the blue-striped pot was on Sophie's windowsill when they got home. It had put out 2 new leaves in the past 3 weeks. It was doing fine. It was doing, in fact, better than fine. It was growing.